President Biden is defending the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He spoke about 24 hours after the last troops left the country. The president said America's longest war should have ended years ago. He also praised the evacuation efforts and honored the 13 service members who lost their lives during an attack at Kabul airport last week. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has the latest.
My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over.
President Biden tonight fiercely defending the pullout.
I take responsibility for the decision.
While the newly empowered Taliban celebrated the U.S. departure with a mock funeral and showed off U.S.-supplied military equipment left behind, though rendered inoperable by exiting American forces. The Pentagon released these images of the final moments. 500 soldiers boarding 5 C-17s. The last one wheels up at 1 minute before midnight, the official end of the war. The last man out, Major General Chris Donahue, serving his 4th tour in Afghanistan. He was in the Pentagon when it was hit on 9/11. The president said 90% of those Americans who wanted to leave, over 5,500, got out and vowed to help the 100 to 200 remaining, though with the assistance of the Taliban.
We don't take them by their word alone, but by their actions. And we have leverage to make sure those commitments are met.
CBS News has learned that as part of a secret deal, the Taliban did escort Americans to the Kabul airport during the evacuation, with U.S. drones watching overhead. But the bloody end to the 20-year war, 13 service members killed just 5 days ago, has caused criticism of Mr. Biden's judgment.
Right now we should get every American home. I believe there should be accountability for what I see as probably the biggest failure in American government on a military stage in my lifetime.
The president explained his administration began reaching out to Americans in Afghanistan starting in March, and said even if the evacuation had started sooner, there still would have been a rush to the airport.
The bottom line is there is no evacuation from the end of a war that you can run without the kinds of complexities, challenges, and threats we faced.
And challenges remain, making sure Afghanistan doesn't again become a safe haven for terrorists.
And to ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
And how to safely resettle Afghan refugees, now coming into the United States.
And Ed joins me now for more from the White House. So, Ed, we heard President Biden strongly defend his decision to end the war in Afghanistan. What did you make of the president's tone in this address?
Look, if you've been listening to what he has said about the war in Afghanistan over the last several months, it wasn't terribly different, but it was a more forceful defense. And his attempt, I think, to button this up and try to move on, even though, of course, the U.S. engagement in the country will change and continue, especially in terms of trying to get out Americans and eligible Afghans that still want to leave, and figuring out how exactly to work with the new government or whoever ends up running Afghanistan. But making the point again that is very popular in this country, and that is that after 20 years, nearly 20 years of armed conflict, it's time for it to be over. Reiterating that while it may not have gone exactly as people would have hoped, it was never going to go easy, because withdrawals from these kinds of prolonged military occupations never do. And once again called out the sacrifice of the 13 who were killed, and the thousands of U.S. diplomatic, intelligence, and military personnel who had something to do with the evacuation over the last several weeks.
And the State Department says there are still upwards of 100 Americans in Afghanistan. What kind of efforts are underway to get those Americans back to the U.S.?
We're still trying to sort that out, Elaine, because we ask, what are they supposed to do? Who are they supposed to call? How long are they going to have to wait? And the only answer we really get back is, well, we're in touch with them. We're trying to figure that out. We're talking to them by WhatsApp and email and text and phone if they've got it. But, you know, practically, hour by hour, what exactly it is they're being told to do or how long they're being told to wait is unclear. And as the White House made clear today, a few things are in play. A, who's in control of that airport you see there? And how quickly can it be functional again from a civilian standpoint? B, what other partner countries are going into Afghanistan now that we could potentially work with to work on getting people out? And C, most critically perhaps, does the Taliban continue to ensure safe passage for any American or eligible Afghan who wants to leave, or any other foreign national for that matter, as they seek legitimacy on the world stage? The White House reiterating again today, they don't consider the Taliban a trusted partner, and should they start acting up, there is significant economic leverage that can be used against them.
Yeah, can you talk a bit more? What specifically is that economic leverage?
It's mostly just the money that is held up by, or that Afghanistan has essentially with our Federal Reserve, plus sanctions that have existed and would continue to exist on certain senior Afghan officials. And the idea being also that, look, if whatever becomes of whoever is running Afghanistan is seeking to redevelop the country's economy, well, they're going to have to be meeting certain benchmarks and sort of being, they have to be seen as a reputable and trustworthy partner in running that country and ensuring that aid that has been going to millions of Afghans through the years can continue without government interference. So a lot of work to do. And it's going to be troubling or troubled and difficult for the United States, given that now our nearest diplomatic outpost focused on Afghanistan is in Qatar, thousands of miles away.
Well, Ed, on Sunday, the president met with families of the 13 service members who were killed in last week's suicide bombing outside the Kabul airport. Some of those families have been very critical, as you know, of their interactions with the president. How is the White House responding to that criticism?
They're not responding to it specifically, and they continue to say, look, these families have given the ultimate sacrifice, and the president has some sense of what it is to lose a child, given that he's lost two. But the reports that we've seen, some of which CBS has confirmed about the interactions between the president and those that were there to welcome home the remains of those service members, suggest that some of them were quite raw, quite confrontational, and that they didn't like what they heard or saw in the president's behavior and statements that day. A lot of focus on the fact that at times during this transfer ceremony, or dignified transfer is what the military calls it, forgive me, the president was spotted looking at his watch. We haven't gotten clarification on what exactly that was about and how often it might have gone on in the private engagement with the families, but it's that kind of concern that has been expressed by just a few of the families. Remember, there were 13. 11 of them were okay with and approved public press coverage of the transfer ceremony of their loved one. 2 of the families did not. None of these meetings were open to the public, nor should they be, perhaps. And you know, and again, the White House just isn't going to engage on the details of it, but of course is quite thankful and reverential towards their sacrifice. And they made clear the president hopes to keep in touch with at least some of those families.
All right, Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Ed, thank you very much.